Thanks for tuning in to the Animal Control Report podcast, where we help debunk the dog catcher stereotype. A lot of times people think it's the dog catcher when they hear about animal control officers. But here on the Animal Control Report, we change that by taking you inside the day-to-day operations of animal control officers. Not only will you hear stories of animal control officers, but you'll hear from industry experts as well. We are also part of the Keep It Humane podcast network. We have some amazing partners there, so check them out at keepithumane.com/podcast network. You can listen to all the animal control and animal welfare related podcasts there. And let's continue to help people help animals.
Welcome to another episode of the Animal Control Report with your hosts,
Ashlee Bishop.
And Ashlee Bishop.
Should we just start calling you ARB? A-R-B? Or ARB?
Sure.
ARB.
Oh my
Sure.
God.
Or should we just keep calling you Ashley? I like calling you Ashlee Bishop.
Is she a pirate?
ARB.
I have a pirate dog.
You do have a pirate dog. A cute pirate dog, to be specific. And I'm your other host, Daniel Ettinger. Thanks for joining us. Make sure you check out our website, keepithumane.com. And we did a flash sale because of Amazon Prime Week and sold out of the self-defense catchable keychains and a few other things. So that's cool. Also, it's coming. If you can see behind me if you're watching on YouTube or Spotify, these are going to be made. You can see that, right, when I move? These are going to be made as a Velcro. Well, I can't use the word Velcro because I don't have a deal with Velcro. Hook and loop style. That's what they call it because you can't use Velcro. Hook and loop style patches that you can put anywhere that has the opposite side of the hook and loop.
Oh, nice.
Neat.
Yeah, so that's coming soon to a theater near you. Also, really quick, can I just get this off my chest? Whoever designed Boston as a city, my goodness. So you get out of the airport and you go in this like maze of tunnels. Now I know what ants feel like because it's like you go in these tunnels and then you have to merge and then lanes end and then you have exits out of the tunnel. It was mind-boggling that's
and you drove.
Yeah. And I think it took me just like 30 minutes just to get out of the tunnels from the airports. Like it was unreal. So I just had to get that off my chest. So whoever designed Boston, you get an F. How was y'all's weekend?
Busy.
Yeah.
I had to go into work on Saturday. We were a little short staffed, so I went in at 6 to help out staff, and we had a bunch of cats, so I started on cats and then got home around 10
PM?
No, in the morning. I was there for like 4 hours. And then staff came in, got what they needed to get done, and then they were like, okay, you can get out of here, thanks for your help. I was like, all right, bye.
Wow, that's nice of you to do that though. Sometimes it shows really good merit as a leader to be able to step up when things like that happen.
Yeah. Dan,
So-
you sound extremely tired.
Yeah. Maybe just a little bit. AB, what about you?
I also was very busy. We had lots of picnics between work picnics and 4-H picnics, but I had an incredibly interesting conversation about 3 hours ago, 2.5 hours ago, with a veterinarian.
At the picnic?
Yeah, at the our 4-H coordinator is also our veterinarian.
Got it.
So we were having a discussion and I was like, hey, yeah, I'm just getting ready. I got to get going because I got to get ready for the podcast. So we got talking about it. And they're like, oh, who are you interviewing today? And I said, well, we've got a guest on who's a former Best Friends employee. And they're like, well, what's Best Friends? And this was not with the veterinarian. This was with everybody else. And I said, well, the no kill movement, we got to save them all and no kill movement. And they're like, well, what's the no kill movement? And the veterinarian stepped in and she goes, well, you can't euthanize anything. You can't euthanize it if it's unhealthy. You can't. And after I let her go through everything. And afterwards I looked at her and I said, it is very interesting to me that you as a veterinarian, you as being in the field, gave that explanation, because when we have spoke with best friends before, they have been very explicit with us that no kill does not mean we don't euthanize anything. So the fact that you, as somebody in the field, have this misconception, clearly it is a misconception and they need to get rid of the phrasing of it.
Well, that's interesting. And you should have directed them to watch this podcast or listen to this podcast, because I think we're going to have a really good episode today, as our guest today used to work for Best Friends. And I want to introduce Temma Martin. And Temma, just really quickly before we even get started, she and I met through LinkedIn. And she's also, believe it or not, just saying, out of the four of us, there's two of us that have the cat challenge tattoo. And I'll tell you, the two people that do have it are me.
Don't have the same name.
Well, yeah, they don't have the same name, while the other two people that have it have the same name. So, Temma, thanks for joining us. And if you're watching on,
Look at that.
if you're watching on YouTube or
There you go.
Spotify, you can see it, and she has her cat. Is that Squishy on your arm?
It's Flash, actually. I have 4 tuxedo cats, so they all look more or less the same, but the one on my arm is supposed to be Flash. He's our COVID kitty.
Oh,
No, that's awesome.
But
So
I'm a proud bearer of the cat tats. So it's a good conversation starter.
You're
So
one-
my mom still hasn't acknowledged it. So
she won't. She thinks it's a kid drawing on your arm.
I
Probably.
think so.
I mean, Dan is a kid at heart.
We're up to 13, and so the first person that gets arrested, hopefully it's none of us. That tattoo might get put into the FBI database for related activity. So we have to be careful. All the people that are listening that have this tattoo, don't get in trouble. Okay.
That's my goal.
So for us, I guess our listeners, we'd love your background and like how, like you and I have chatted offline, but like how you really got into animal welfare, what you did, and kind of where you're at in general at this point.
Sure. Thanks for having me. This is really exciting for me to be here. I started in probably before the Ashlees were born. I started it at the Humane Society of Utah in 1993 when I was in my 20s. And
Oh no, I was alive.
oh, good. Okay, thank you.
I was
Toddler.
5.
Okay, see, I was their education director for 4 years, and then I worked for Salt Lake County Animal Services for 10 years. And during that time, I did public relations. That's where my public relations career began. And during those 10 years, I was actually representing No More Homeless Pets in Utah, which was the Maddie's Fund funded piece, like under the Best Friends umbrella. That was the beginning of the coalition in Utah to work together and try to end the killing of pets in Utah. So that started I was with that just on contract from 2000 to 2005, and then got riffed from Salt Lake County in 2008, worked for a little tiny shelter for a year, and then started with Best Friends in 2009. So I thought, I mean, that's looking back, 31 years, I thought I was on the path that was going to be the rest of my career. And I thought I had my dream job. And to be honest, for 13 years, it was my dream job. And I thought that I would never have to look for another job. And I thought that I would continue to be, I did public relations for Best Friends as well. The last 7 months I was there, I moved to the advocacy team, thinking that I would have like a better opportunity to be more of a, help make Best Friends a thought leader and talk about the things that need to be talked about, to try to sort of reverse the trends that we're all seeing, thinking that Best Friends was a powerful, vocal organization that could have made a difference. And really the last year I was there, I realized that I was not able to help in the ways that I wanted to help. And it was hurting me physically and emotionally to try to continue to to see things happening all around me and not be able to be the voice to try to make a difference. So I left, and without realizing it at the time, launched myself into a horrendous job market. But I left best friends thinking I have amazing experience and I'm really good at what I do, and I'm going to be snapped up by another organization immediately. And that didn't happen. So it's been an interesting year of reflection. Ultimately, what I decided to do, and I still am in the process of putting this together, but I've started a nonprofit called Operation Population, PAW. And there's no website yet, but it's, I bought a building in our neighborhood and I'm making it into a nonprofit, low-cost spay-neuter clinic, but also it'll also be an advocacy organization. And I hope very much not only to make spay-neuter more accessible, again, we can talk more about this, but also just be able to talk about it from my own platform and be able to talk about really what's happening, what I see going on, and how individuals in the community can make a difference. And I hope for this to be, you know, a national voice, not just in Utah.
And you have the experience to run with that. I think that's a great and such a clever name. I wonder, I guess to start just with some of the questions that we have, what do you feel like currently is stopping us from being able to really have, I guess, lack of better words, a no-kill community for our pets?
Oh, one thing before I answer that question. For the last year, I worked on contract with Shelter Animals Count. So I was able to get a lot of, you know, it's invisible. You don't see me doing it, but a lot of the national media attention to the community pet crisis was coming out of Shelter Animals Count, because I really do trust their data. And it was an amazing opportunity, you know, even as a part-time contractor, to be able to take that data and give it context. So a lot of what I know now is coming out of the data that Shelter Animals Count is producing. And so to answer your question, Dan, I think it's interesting from my perspective to look at everybody that cares about animals seems to be coming, a lot of people are coming from different places in terms of what they think needs to happen to make things better. And unfortunately, when it comes to the national organizations, I feel like there's a very disturbing, and it's not new for sure, and you all know this, but there's a very disturbing trend where it seems like some of the national spokespeople seem to think that shelters can solve the problem, and shelters should be doing this or that differently, and you know, barriers to adoption and all that. And I, even from when I was still with best friends, I was trying to say, for sure, there are shelters that can do things better, and there are shelters that are doing absolutely everything, finger quotes, right, best practices, doing exactly what, you know, the national organizations want them to do, and they're still struggling because the crisis does not originate within the shelters. And until, yes, there are issues with the economy, and yes, there are housing issues, but the biggest thing that is so frustrating for me, and what I want to be able to talk about, is nobody is putting the focus on empowering individual pet parents to make better choices. And I look around, you know, I'm in Salt Lake City, and I look around and I see so many people breeding, so many people buying puppies. I go to the farmer's market, and forgive me, I see dog testicles everywhere. And best friends, I feel, is not talking enough about spay neuter, and they've sort of pushed that to the side, and that was one of the things I was told should not be my focus as a PR person. And I was very frustrated by that, because I think that the biggest thing that needs to happen is we need to get people who are getting pets from other sources, which a lot of the data show that 80% of pets are coming from other sources outside of shelters and rescues. And until those people that are getting pets from other sources are getting their pets spayed or neutered, we're going to continue to have this explosion. And shelters are dealing with the crisis that's coming out of their community. They're not causing it. They're not, they can't solve it without the cooperation of their people in their community. So that's very frustrating to me, because
Shelters are realistically the cleanup crew in this whole mess.
Like I tell everybody that comes in who's like, oh, well, you're the kill shelter in our area. We're a reflection of our community. We can only do as much as the community allows us to do. And it's our job to, in turn, make sure that we're educating so that we can be a better reflection of what our communities are.
Absolutely. And, when I worked for Salt Lake County Animal Services, I was thinking about this, and that was, that was more than 20 years ago. And there were people, I literally remember a woman, I don't even know why she was there. She was there for some sort of event. And she said to me, I would never adopt from a shelter that euthanizes. I would only support an organization like Best Friends. And that was before I had anything to do with Best Friends, other than, we're all in Utah. And I said to her, 1,000 people with your mentality are the reason 1,000 animals get euthanized. Because what if you are saying you won't adopt from a shelter that euthanizes, who do you think is going to do it? So you're going to boycott the shelter that euthanizes. What do you think is going to happen? So that's been, I have always looked at that as there's such a good guy, bad guy mentality, which here we are, all these years later. And I thought of a PSA in my head back then. And I thought, we don't blame the fire department for fires, and we don't blame the domestic violence shelter for domestic violence. Why do we blame shelters for euthanasia? Because shelters are dealing with what's coming at them from the community. When people are saying, we can't, the shelters are full of big dogs, we can't get the big dogs adopted. Well, where are the big dogs coming from? Who's breeding? I mean, around here, tons of people are breeding Great Pyrenees. And yes, they're adorable, fluffy puppies, but they get giant, and they're livestock, guarding dogs.
One of the things that I hear from a lot of the larger organizations, and this is something that I want to continue to work through. And I also want to get back to shelter animals count in a little bit. So please remind me. But with what we're talking about, and your perspective on this is brilliant, is, in my opinion, we have to have some sort of a regulatory oversight, but a lot of these organizations are against ticketing. And I get that. None of us, all three of us on the show, have done animal control in some aspect or another. And so I Bishop and AB, I don't want to speak for you, but I would like to go into a situation providing resources. And I think you can do that like as a combination where it's, hey, this is the law. You have to spay and neuter your pet. Here's a free voucher, or here's a very low cost spay and neuter voucher. And if you don't do it within X amount of time, then it can be a ticket issue, because those stubborn people, those people that want to continue to breed and exploit the system, they should be held accountable. The people that don't have access to care should be provided access to care.
Yeah.
Agreed. Our motto, like you guys know, is education before citation. We give every opportunity to educate the individual on what is proper, and what kind of resources we have, even as small of a facility as we are. It's at the end of the day, again, is to change that rhetoric. We are no longer dog catchers. We're no longer dog pounds. We're here to help, but at the same time, you got to be able to help yourself and your pet.
Exactly. I think another thing that I wish people would understand at this point in time, everything, I feel like we were on a better trajectory before the pandemic. And I know that's the understatement of the century. But when people say, when people talk about shelter dogs, and I see on the rehoming pages around here, there's like tons and tons of local Facebook rehoming pages, and tons of the dogs are purchased from breeders and then they're being rehomed. None of them are spayed or neutered. They're just getting passed around. And sometimes a person will pop on and say they're actually looking to get a pet instead of giving one up. And when people say that they should check the shelters because the shelters have everything you can imagine, sometimes people say, well, not everybody wants a shelter pet. And I don't think people know what shelter pets, when you think of a shelter dog, currently shelters are getting everything. Shelters are getting litters from breeders that they can't sell. So whatever you imagine, especially with the all the hybrids and the doodles and the 50,000 different mixed breed dogs that have a cute, clever name that people think that makes them valuable because somebody maybe bred them on purpose, even though they're still mixed breeds. So you've got all these people that think, oh, I'm not going to go to a shelter because I don't want a shelter dog. Well, some of the shelter dogs are the same dogs that you could have bought. In fact, one of my friends, she didn't get it from a shelter. She got it from a rehoming situation, but she ended up getting from the rehoming page, an Irish doodle. She wasn't even looking for a doodle, but she was constantly scanning these pages, and the breeder is still breeding them. They sell them new for $1,400, and she got it from somebody for $25 that just wanted to get rid of it. So anyone who's looking for a particular type of dog, check the shelters, check the rescues, because the variety of dogs coming in right now is like never before because of
some of the
saturation.
Some of the rhetoric, though, could be the reason they don't want to go to a shelter is because maybe they've heard or they themselves has had a shelter dog that may have behavioral issues or medical issues. And in past years, maybe that animal wouldn't have been an adoption candidate, but because we're pushing that narrative for this high live release rate, we're putting dogs in the community that are unsafe and unhealthy.
Oh,
Is that a question or an observation?
both.
Okay.
It's both. I mean, there's data that supports it, that says that this is happening.
And I believe that it probably sometimes is happening, but anymore, I think that shelters are going on their 4th year of being over capacity. And I'm not sure, I think probably it's as likely at this point that dogs are getting euthanized that don't have behavior problems just because of space in a lot of cases. So I don't think that dogs that used to maybe have more of a chance, and again, I know when I say shelters, there's all, as we all know, all different types of shelters and all different policies, and not everybody's doing the same thing or seeing this, some shelters may be adopting out dogs with behavior problems that shouldn't be adopted, and other shelters are so full that they're euthanizing for space dogs that don't have any problems. They just don't, they have to take in, by contract what's coming to them in the community, and they have to euthanize for space. And some of those, some of the pulse checks we did through Shelter Animals Count, we had people say, we're putting down perfectly good dogs at this point that have nothing wrong with them. And so when you think about where we are in this crisis, I don't know. And again, certainly some shelters are adopting out dogs that they shouldn't be, and other shelters have more dogs that have no issues than they have space for.
So I have a question for you, Temma. So when I feel like there's a lot of, at least for me personally, I'm in the South, so overpopulation is already awful.
Sure.
So I hear a lot of people here recently say, this is the worst it's ever been. For me personally, in the state I'm in, it's always been like this. Like there's been no change whatsoever. So where do you think that rhetoric is coming from? Because I keep seeing like, oh, well, the intake's not as bad anymore. You know, it's because people are not doing the right programming or whatever the case might be.
I'm
Why is
really
that?
glad that you mentioned that, because that was actually something that I wanted to talk about. Because two pieces of this. I think, and I've heard others say, that intake is no longer a reliable way of measuring what's happening, because a full shelter is a full shelter. An overcapacity shelter is an overcapacity shelter. You are not going to see intake continue to increase when the shelters are so full. It just can't. So like at the point, unless shelters are euthanizing, when adoptions are so low, they can't, they're either euthanizing for space and they still have intake, or they're just saying, we can't take any more animals. So those animals I'm very concerned about. And I was listening to some of your other episodes, and I don't remember, because I listened to them all in a row, I don't remember who talked about this, but something that I'm very concerned about is how many animals are being turned away and what's happening to them. I actually think it was Paulette that talked about it. And
Yeah, that
what
was
happens
last
to
week.
what happens to the dogs that are turned away, or the cats that are not accepted, and they die outside of a shelter, and they die not a humane death, because they're either getting hit by cars or all the things that can happen to them. Those animals are uncounted, which there's two competing sources for shelter keeping track of shelter data, but nobody can keep track of what's happening outside the shelters. I would be very curious to know. And if I was able to take over shelter animals count, I would ask all the shelters, are you seeing an increase in DOAs? Because if people are being turned away, so, owner surrenders are also down. So that sounds like good news, right? It sounds like, well, it's not good news, because they're down because shelters can't take them, or, give people an appointment date to come back. And in the meantime, I mean, admittedly, people are letting them go, or bringing them in and saying they're strays when they're their own pets. So stray intakes up, owner surrenders are down, and how many animals are out there, dying outside of the shelters now? Ashlee, what we can say?
I was going to say, I had a situation. I no longer work for this jurisdiction, but I work for a jurisdiction that, first of all, they stopped taking cats in altogether, but the officers, when I wasn't working, would not take animals into the shelter, even though they were supposed to. And so I had one time that a citizen took matters into his own hands, because he had a kitten that was sick and clearly dying, and he couldn't get anybody to take it in, and he knew that this kitten was suffering. And so he dug a hole. He's an ex-Marine. He knew enough. He dug a hole, he put the kitten in it, and he shot the kitten to put it out of its misery, because that was the only thing at that time he knew to do, because he didn't have the means to take it into the vet himself. And then turned around, and the officers gave him a citation for discharging a firearm. So we're going to see other situations like that too, because, even shooting your own animal is it's an accepted means of euthanasia by the AVMA. And so I foresee a lot more of that, but people, are we going to have more people getting in trouble for it, depending on where they're doing it? And are they going to actually be doing it in a humane manner?
When we talk about us from the aspect of the regulatory part, making spay and neuter mandatory, you have the no-kill movement trying to make no-kill mandatory in certain states. And it's just like, it's a contradiction, because you can't have one without the other. Really quick, going back to something you said, Temma, is You said there's two databases or two places that animal shelter data go to. And so this was one of the questions I wanted to ask before. We know shelter animals counts. That's so hard to say. Why is it so hard to say?
Because you
can
are Dan.
call them SAC. SAC. SAC.
Oh, I don't like that.
I don't like that either.
Yeah, I wasn't even going to go there, but I appreciate y'all too. Who's the other one?
It sounds like they need to be neutered.
Yeah.
Temma, who's the other one?
Well, Best Friends and their sheltered
So
SPDA,
that
Shelter
was the
Pet Data
question.
Alliance.
That was the question I was going to go to. Why did they decide to pull out of SAC? Wow. Whoa. Nope.
Nope.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
see?
Mhm.
See,
Nope.
having worked for them for a year, it sounds normal to me, but I totally understand where you're coming from. We will say the words. Shelter animals count. Officially, I'm not exactly sure because they used to be more partners, but it probably my guess is that Best Friends is, their mission is dependent on the data, and they probably wanted to have their own control of the data that they were producing. That was trying to get up and running during the time that I was, during the last year that I was there. And there's some friction for sure between the two organizations, but I'll just say that Shelter Animals Count's mission is to provide reliable, neutral data. And I trust their data because that's their mission versus
There's data, or I have access to a slideshow from El Paso County, Texas, where if I'm not mistaken, it was Haas that came into the shelter and basically came up with some algorithm to call like small dogs 1, medium-sized dogs 2, large 3, and then extra large 4 dogs. And so that way your numbers, if you adopt out one extra large dog, that counts for 4 dogs in your database. Have you heard of that before?
Only on your podcast. So I have not independently heard about that. It's an interesting concept. I'm not sure.
It's bonkers.
I don't know
bonkers.
I don't know if anybody that's actually collecting data has heard about that. So
No, but it's just like for us, in my facility, like we tell everybody, everything counts, all the way to the injured possum, to the raccoon, to whatever, everything, all the numbers count. I don't understand why our industry just doesn't do that. All your numbers should count. Every animal that we come in contact with should count. It doesn't matter if it was aggressive or it's not up to somebody else's standards. It should count. Our mission is to be transparent, to save the animals that we come in contact with. But we're doing a disservice to our industry and to the communities for not allowing that to happen.
Do you know, Temma, to the best of your knowledge and before you left Best Friends even, the information that is being collected between the two, is it the same information? Like, are they getting the exact same data and then just representing it differently?
no, because both Shelter Animals Count and Best Friends they get as much data as they can from the shelters. In both cases, it's voluntary reporting.
Okay.
So they're both competing to get as many shelters as they can to report their data. And then both of them use kind of modeling based on that to fill in the gaps and it's not as simple as just filling in the gaps. I know Shelter Animals Count looks at seasonality and locality and all these things to figure out where they don't have like reported data to get the most accurate depiction of what would, the modeling and forecasting of what isn't represented. I'm no longer on the inside with Best Friends, but Best Friends was trying to say, that that they had the most sophisticated system for, they're very similar actually. And but they were trying to basically say their data was more reliable than Shelter Animals Counts data. And so, and again, I think data is incredibly important. I think it's vital to look at what's happening and try to, in my opinion, sharing it with the public and letting people know what shelters are experiencing and what rescues are experiencing because of the choices that they're making as individuals. And so I feel that, moving forward, one of the things that I really want to do is do, national media outreach and use everyone's data. Mars just did their state of pet homelessness report is a gold mine of really interesting data. And you can, it's global, but you can get just the US information. And, that's where I found the information that 20% of people are getting their, or it might be 23, but anyway, it's a low percentage are actually adopting from shelters and rescues. And so 80% aren't. And people are very confused even about what adoption means. And I think that a huge goal that I have is to be able to clarify that adoption and acquisition are very different. And one helps and makes a difference in our cause, and the other hurts. And I think since the pandemic, in fact, the ASPCA had a report from May of 2021 that and it's widely cited constantly, like 23 million people acquired, 23 million households acquired a pet during the pandemic, which was 1 in 5 households. But they used the word acquired. But most headlines, even people in animal welfare think that it very quickly gets changed to 23 million people adopted, which is what is making people go, well, it was such a fairy tale that, we had record adoptions during the pandemic, and how did we get here? But those weren't adoptions. Some of them were, but an acquisition, as we know, is the opposite in many cases. And so you have all these people thinking, how did this happy beginning during the pandemic turn into this crisis? And I think that people just don't even understand what the word means and why that's important. One other thing I was going to say, going back to ARB's question earlier, when people say it's the worst it's ever been, I think and again, I'm an individual now, trying to talk about these things without being, boots on the ground anymore. But I think a big reason that it feels this way is because people compare, again, we talked about the intake, intake's not a reliable measurement, but, when you compare to 2019, even if intake isn't up, in 2019, we were going in the right direction. Things were getting better across the board. And when people say, oh, it's not as bad as it was before, it feels worse because we went from a positive trajectory where it felt like we were making progress. More people were spaying and neutering, more people were adopting. And then the pandemic just disrupted all of that. And now we're backsliding for years. I mean, even Utah, which was supposed to be the second, and again, I apologize for the language, but this is where where we were coming from at the time. Utah by 2019 was supposed to be the second no-kill state in the country. And we have had a coalition since 2000. We were working together. We were making constant progress. But even our numbers, and again, I'm using Best Friends numbers because that's, on the state level, that's what I have. But the best year we had was 2020, and we were supposedly 829 animals away from reaching the every shelter, every
Where
community.
where does this come from? You were there for 13 years. Where did this 90% come from? Because I've tried to research it, others have tried to research it, and it just sounds like it's a magic number thrown out. Can you give insight to where this actually came from?
I don't think, I mean, I think Best Friends claims it now, but I think that there was more of a coalition back many years ago. I don't even know how many years ago, maybe decades, where that was created as a benchmark. And I'm not sure who all was involved. I don't feel like
That's the
any
whole
of the
thing. It's like,
people are
why are we
still
using this as a point, a target, if we don't even know the basis of it? As we talked about on our last episode, is every community is going to be different. Every animal shelter is going to have just a different way of approaching things. And so we create this magical number that there's no true analytics to support it. Because I'll tell you right now, and this is just from my own experience and someone who unfortunately has been somewhat of a gypsy in this profession, where I've worked at different agencies, and so I've been able to see it. I've worked in communities where the socioeconomic impact is great. Like, you don't have any sort of low cost, or not low cost, any communities that may not have the ability to provide access to care for those animals. We were literally bringing animals in because we didn't have strays. So we would get those animals from other communities because we had no adoptable pets. And then you go to certain neighborhoods that I worked in, and it's like, holy crap, there's stray dogs running around everywhere. So you can't pull one place and say, well, if you looked at the data and you determine that healthy and aggressive animals are going to make up 10%. Yeah, that might be true in one community, but it's not going to be true in another community. So why are we having this arbitrary benchmark that there's no science or data that can truly support it?
Join us next week for part 2 of episode Still No Kill?